All right, let's begin. I'm coming from I was all ready, but we're coming from one joy to one type of l'chaim. I was hoping Sam can join. I wanted to just call Sam because I really would like him to join if he's available. So, if you give me a moment, I want us to say l'chaim to Sam.
Oh, sounds good.
Today is the 10th yahrzeit of his son. So give me a moment. Sam.
Just tried to join you.
Okay, the password is 770.
What passcode?
770.
Okay, I'm just trying to physically. Just a second.
Okay, good. I just wanted to start with Hamish. Yeah?
How's it, Darby?
Hello, Marky.
Hey, Wiki.
All right, so welcome everybody. Nice to see Sam said he's joining now. I'll tell you that I'm coming from one l'chaim to another l'chaim. I have another shir that I do just before this, and I had planned that today we would start our shir with a l'chaim in memory of Mark. But I do want to wait for Sam to join. So if you have a l'chaim somewhere that you want to quickly grab a bottle, always good to find an excuse to have a l'chaim. One of the things, one of the good reasons to be a rabbi, you see. Maybe you should, Mark. Maybe change your mind. Start off your day with a l'chaim. Oh, Sam, he's in the middle of Italy. So I've got my bottle. This is real, and it's specific. I can't hear you, Sam. Your sound's off.
Sorry, I put him back.
No, now I can hear you. Okay, so this is a real l'chaim.
Hi.
It is a Venice.
Venice. Beautiful. From my wife's home place. So
yes.
We want to start off with a big l'chaim to Sam, that it should be a year of, first of all, Le'ilu Nishmas, in honor of the elevation of the soul of Mordechai ben Shmuel and Miriam, that the neshama should have an elevation, and what we say in Yiddish should be a good to better for those down here. It should be a good blessing, and a request for his children, his parents, and his entire family, his wife Stephanie, Sam and Marina. It's a very special day. It's not just any yahrzeit, it's the 10th yahrzeit, and 10 is of course very, very special in Jewishness. So it's a very special day. So l'chaim. L'chaim. Okay. So interestingly enough, I just made another l'chaim because I have another shir just before this. And in the middle of the shir, I got a phone call. My sister, the way it works in Chabad is the way traditionally we would do it is you would date somebody. Then when you're ready to get engaged, let's say the guy would propose. And then you would write to the Rebbe saying that you guys have decided to get married and you want to now a blessing. And then once you got the Rebbe's blessing, then you would tell everybody. That's the way we did it traditionally. So, so after the Rebbe passed away, instead of writing to the, we write to the Rebbe and we go to the oil if we can, if we're in New York. So my sister's in New York, and in the middle of my previous shir, just about 20 minutes ago, I got a phone call that she was in the oil and they had now formally become engaged. So I just made a l'chaim over there. So
Mazel tov.
So that's l'chaim. This is my youngest sister. But today's shir is dedicated to the neshama of Mordechai ben Shmuel and Miriam. Okay, let's get going.
Rabbi, can I ask you?
Yes.
We are not supposed to have contact with the people who passed away. So how come that we contact the Rebbe in order to ask him to put a good word in for us?
Okay, so I'll tell you what, that's a very good question, but it's probably a good hour share in and of itself, but maybe let's stay at 1 o'clock for those or afterwards, and we'll talk about it a little bit. How does that sound?
Okay,
Because,
sounds good.
Okay, because it's just, it would derail us a little bit. It's a very good question. Okay, very important question. Okay, today we're up to Mishnah 7. And Mishnah 7, Mishnah 6, if you just a quick revision over there, because it's connected, every Mishnah is connected. We said that Yeshua ben Prachia and Nitar Bailey received from them. So there was pairs, right? So we're still in this generation of pairs. And last week we spoke about Yeshua ben Prachia, who could have been the teacher of Yoshka, of JC. He said, make yourself a rabbi, make yourself a master. And then he concluded with, judge everybody favorably. Now, when he said judge everybody favorably, we understood that Mishnah was talking about 3 different types of people in our lives. Those people that we consider superior to us in our service of God. And we said that we should choose one of those to be a mentor for us. Then people that we consider equal, that we should make into our friends, that we can join them in our service. And then those people that we consider on a lower level in service, and we're told we should never judge them because you don't know what that's going through. Comes along Nitai Bailey, and Nitai Bailey was he was second in command, so to speak. We don't know much about Nitai Bailey, but I want to just point the connection between the 2 Mishnahot is he says, it's true that you have to judge people favorably. That's extremely important. But at the same time, you have to make sure that doesn't make you connect to the wrong people. Okay, and we'll discuss what that means as we go along. But I wanted to start off to show you the connection between where we're coming from, putting things in perspective. All right, so who was Nitar Bailey? And the answer to that is I don't know. We have very little written from or about Nitai Bailey. We know that he was what's known as the Av Beth Din. He was the leader of the Beth Din at the time of this of that era. Yeshua ben Prachia, who was his partner, he was the Nasi, he was the leader, and he was the head of the Beth Din. He's only quoted 1 other time in the entire Mishnah. So we don't have much word from him. What we do know about him is where he's buried. And he's buried, interestingly enough, next to Rabbi Zera, who's another one of the great Amoraim, and Dina bat Yaakov, Dina, who's the daughter of Yaakov. Okay, so that's what we do know about this man. But let's look more at, as I say, very often we have so much to talk to, so much about it. When the last guy we had, Yeshua ben Prachia, and we had so many stories in the Talmud about him, and I just limited it. And then even the next guy, Shimon ben Shatach, that we're going to have coming up in the next 2, there's plenty to talk. Nitar Bailey is very unknown. And I wouldn't say that it's a little bit of a difficult Mishnah, because let's learn the Mishnah and you'll see why it seems a little bit difficult. Okay, look over here. Distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Harchek mishachin ra. Distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Al titchaber l'rasha. Do not cleave to a wicked person. And v'al tityaesh min haparaniyot. Do not abandon a belief in retribution. And I want to try to now go through this piece by piece. Let's first look at harchek mishachin ra. Now, why was he saying his position in the lead of the Beth Din is the Beth Din was where people would come to get judged. And what he looked at as his responsibility was to try to make sure that people don't have to be judged and don't have to get in trouble. So he says the best way to avoid coming to court is if you don't have bad people that you can involve with yourself. So he looks at the underlying issue as being people connecting to the wrong types of people, which is interesting. When we talk in this week's portion, we talk about Noach, and many of the commentaries lodge onto the fact that he says, Tamim haya b'dorotav, that he was a righteous in his generation, and says in his generation, because his generation, the people were really wicked, but if it would have been another generation, he would not have been that great. But the Maggid of Mezrich says that that may be true, but the fact is that the people before the flood were so wicked to stay righteous in the time when all your shchenim, all your neighbors were wicked, was something which is truly miraculous. And that was the real praise of Noach. Because there's a famous concept that we say in the Torah, or it's a Talmudic statement which says, Oy l'rasha, o l'shcheno. Woe is to the wicked, and woe is to his neighbor. And interestingly enough, we're told that Rashi quotes this text, in the story of Korach, where Korach tries to rebel against Moses, against Moshe. Over there, we see that who were the wicked people at the time? There were two people by the name of Dasan and Aviram, right? They were constantly badgering and they made issues back before some 40 years old, when Moses was still a youngster. They made issues from him. They reported on Moses to Pharaoh, and Moses had to escape. These were troublemakers. And we're told, how did the Levites, the tribe of Levi, who were always so good, how did they get involved in this lowly debate and rebellion against Moshe? And Rashi says, because they dwelled next to Datan and Aviram. And if you see where they dwelled, where their camps were, that's where these people dwelled. And now that they were living so close, they were influenced. And we know that this is the way it is, that we're influenced by people that we surround, that live next to us. And this has been one of the challenges. We're going to see in one of the later Mishnah that it says a story of a man that says that he was met by a person on the way and said, where do you come from? He says, I come from a town full of great sages. And he says, well, the man said, what happens if I give you millions of gold coins? Will you come and move to our town? He says, even if you gave me all the money in the world, I would never leave the place of Torah. And that's been almost like an idea that most Jewish communities have carried through the generations, that they always try to live together, close-knitted within a shtetl, because they don't want to be influenced by the outside world. And even post-Holocaust, when we saw this decimation of the Jewish people, many of the communities decided that what they're going to do is they're going to, so to speak, build these little communities in New York City, which is, the most, inconducive place for a Jewish community, but they're going to close themselves up, and they tried to do that. Now, they were successful to a certain degree, but as time has gone on, it's become harder and harder. We know with the internet and things like that, these things have just become an impossibility. You cannot no longer live in sheltered communities. But the concept was a true concept, which brings us to another idea. One of the greatest challenges that Chabad have had is this Mishnah. Because the Mishnah says, distance yourself from bad neighbors. If you want your children to grow up to be good, pious Jews, don't surround yourself with a bunch of atheistic non-Jews or promiscuous people. That would be the obvious idea. So I don't know if I'm going to have a time to answer this question about how the Rebbe was able to justify sending out his emissaries to all places in the world where it just simply, on the face of it, would not have been conducive to live a Jewish life, right? And I want to touch on that in a moment, but I first want to go through the Mishnah. I'm just putting it out there because I'm assuming that some of you are probably thinking of that, and it's a good question. And the Rebbe, this was one of the big challenges against Chabad's movement of sending out emissaries. And as I said, all the other communities did the total opposite, where they try to only live together and try to cut out all other outside involvement. Okay, so let's look at some of the other words. There's an interesting story that's brought in one of these Hasidic books that in the old days, many Jewish people, the way they made money was by being innkeepers. They would rent a little house and they would, supply the local people were passing by, they would supply them with a place to sleep and food, and then also, it was also the local pub, and that's the way the Jewish people made money. So this one local Jew, he was a scholar, a pious person, and one day he happened to also be a bookkeeper, very good with his numbers. One day, a bunch of rowdy group of people come into the store and they start arguing about money and issues and these things. So he's listening in and he hears what they're saying and he says, "Oh, I could help you." And he's good at maths. These people don't know what they're doing, and he helps them with their ideas, and he helps them work out all their business. Anyway, they like him and they see that he knows numbers and how he could be helpful, beneficial to them. And they start regularly visiting him, and he starts getting paid more and more. And eventually he realizes that this is actually a gang of thieves. This man happened to be a chassid of the Ruzhiner Rebbe. Ruzhiner Rebbe was one of the great rebbes there was a couple of them, but anyway, he's a great chassid of this. He was a chassid of this great rebbe. But he starts thinking to himself, should I involve myself in the accounting of these people? He says, I'm just doing the numbers, I'm just doing the books, I'm not doing the stealing. Anyway, before he knows it, he's become more and more entrenched in their ways, and he now is he's like one of them. So he became a thief himself, unfortunately. And one day he sees another chassid passing by, and on the way, the chassid says to him, he says to the chassid, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to visit the Rosh, our Rebbe." And suddenly everything comes back, and when he mentions his Rebbe that he hasn't been to in the last few years, he realizes that by joining this group and being connected to these thieves, he actually became one of them. Okay, so this is an important, but what I would say, it's not a very nice thing that you want to be telling people in today's generation. It's not a very PC thing to say, don't hang out. We all tell our kids, be careful who you hang out with. Okay. The Rambam writes about this. He says, by the way, it's not necessarily talking about bad people. He says sometimes a person could be a shachen, a raw person for you. Some people could be great for other people, but they're not necessarily good for you. He could even be a scholar and a saint. Why? He says, you have to know what your path is to God. And the Rambam gives an example of this. And he says, in the introduction to Maimonides' book, his major magnum opus, he writes how every person should try to find the middle path. There's a middle path. You should be, except for, and he has exceptions, humility. You should be totally humble. But when you give charity, you should be generous and give a decent amount, but don't give away all your money. You should be, with all things, try to find the middle path. You should do exercise, but don't over-exercise. Everything is, you have to find a balanced way. And then the Rambam writes, but sometimes you should find an extreme path. When is an extreme? He says, if you've gone the extreme in the wrong direction, you can't just go back to the regular path. For example, he says, if you've been a miser and you don't give charity and you want to change your miserish ways, you can't just start, okay, I'm going to start giving charity. Really, he says, what you should do is you should go to the opposite direction and become a major giver, very generous. And once you've gotten used to the concept of being, then you can go back to the middle path where you're giving at a normal rate. And the same things with everything. If you're getting too angry, he says, go to the extreme that you do something that will prevent you from ever getting heated up. Don't get angry at anything. But the normal thing is that there's place for healthy anger or passion. But if that's your problem, then go to the opposite extreme, right? So this, he gives an example. So he says like this, these type of people, sometimes people need a special way for themselves. And if you connect to somebody that's in one of these extreme circumstances, it's not good for you, right? So that could be a shachin ra for yourself as well. So the Rebbe said about this thing, and this is getting back to the Chabad perspective on this Mishnah, as I say, he would say, it doesn't mean, if you look at the words very carefully, it doesn't say, if you look at the second words, Al titchaber l'rasha, do not connect to a Rasha. What it says like this: you should respect them. You can even be kind and generous and befriend them, but don't attach yourself to them. In other words, recognize, if you have to put things in perspective, do not learn from them and don't allow them to influence you. But remember that you have an obligation to try to influence them. So there's this balancing act that you're going to have to do. When you find somebody that is not going necessarily on the right path, you can't just leave them hanging and drop them. No, you got to connect to them. And the way you connect them is by being respectful and kind and generous to those people. But at the same point, you have to have in mind what your role is. Your role is now to influence, not to be influenced. Not to influence. And this gets back to that question of what the Rebbe answered when people came to this challenge of Chabad. How could we go out to communities where there's not a single other religious person that's living? We should be living amongst people that are good influences on us, that are going to strengthen our Judaism. You go to a community where there's no other Jews. How did he answer this? He said, because you go there knowing that you're going there to elevate the community, not to be brought down by the community. You're there to influence, not to be influenced. When you have that perspective, you can be safe. This is important. If you know, it's so important in today's age, because a lot of people think that when it comes to our children, today's day and age, our children could be, they don't even have to. In the old days, you had to tell your kids when we were in school, and many of you are probably older than me, you had to tell your kids not to find bad friends. Today's day and age, it doesn't necessarily help, because they don't have to go anywhere to get the friends. The friends are right there in front of them. The friends are in your house on their phone. The friends are on the computer. The friends are the TV personalities. How do you make sure that your kids don't get influenced? And the answer to that is that if you know what your role in life is, that you're there to be an influencer, and you cannot keep your kids
dropped out.
Yep, we lost him.
You a bit.
the internet totally. But I'm back in. Could you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I know that many of us have. Some of you have older kids where you can't necessarily connect to what I'm saying, but you definitely will have grandkids or whatever it is. The idea is that the most important thing that we can give our kids today is good values. And when we give the kids the good values, that will give them the strength that even when they do have those negative influences, whether it's on the internet or from TV or from even their friends, social media, that they are going to see. They say, I read I recently read that the average 12-year-old boy has been exposed to an element of pornography. That's crazy when you think about it, right? And this is all different communities. How susceptible people are today, the best thing that we can do is give really strong values. And that's what today's day it is. And when you know what you're there for, that's how you're able to protect yourself. There's, okay, so the Rebbe would look at this a little bit in a kind of Hasidic way, which is like this. There's you as the person. I like this, but it's a little bit subtle. So you got to kind of play with your mind a little bit with it. You have two people that exist in you. You have your godly part of you, and you have your element, your physical side to you, your animalistic, or what some people would call your animal soul or your evil inclination. That's with you the whole time. Or so some people used to think traditionally that our bodies were bad. So what they do about their bodies, they would fast and they would torture themselves, and they would live on very minimal type of physical way. He says that wasn't the Hasidic way. You have to remember your body is not the enemy. we have to take care of our body and use it for good. Influence your body to work towards holiness. But you don't do that through crushing the body. So the flaw that we have to make sure is that we don't become overly materialistic, but at the same time, we don't crush our body. Our body has to be taken care of as healthy. We shouldn't be looking at it as the enemy. We should be looking at it as something that we have to take care of, but not influenced by. Okay? Now, I know that some of you may have some questions on this, but before we get to any questions, I want to first talk about the last part, which is really important. Okay? The last part is, we said, "V'al titya'esh min ha'peronios." Do not despair when it comes to punishment. And this is important because, you know, it's got lots of meanings behind it. Somehow my papers never all printed. 1 second. Where are my papers? Is it double-sided? Oh, it is double-sided. 1 second. Okay. So what it means is like this. When you see wicked prosper, there's different ways. I want to just give you a kind of variety of commentaries on this. One way you look at it is that you see the wicked prosper and you think, well, the wicked are prospering. I know this person is corrupt or he's not a good person, but look how well he's doing. Look at what a good life it is. So the basic understanding is don't despair. Don't think that because, oh, this person's bad and nothing bad is going to happen. Why? Because we know from the story of Haman. Haman, in the story of Purim, he was on the top of the world, but he was the most evil of people. What happened? In an instant, everything came crashing down. So that's a basic understanding of this. That recognize that people that do bad, there are repercussions for that, and they will get the right payment. That's a basic understanding. A little bit of a deeper understanding is for ourselves, that sometimes we do all types of things wrong and we think we'll never get caught or we'll never get punished. And the answer is that, you know, sometimes we can get away from the repercussions, but eventually if we keep up with negative actions, it will creep back up on us. And therefore we should be careful of that. Okay. Now I want to get into a little bit of a deeper idea is that this whole concept of what this punishment is, do not despair of punishments, is that when we look at punishments in Judaism, it's very different to the way other religions will look in punishment. And this is brought out very clearly in the books of Kabbalah and Hasidus. Although some Musar books, Musar is more like other types of books that are trying to get people to change their ways, sometimes they look at it just differently. And the idea is that we look at this, you know, sometimes we talk about reward and punishment. Punishment from a Jewish perspective, it's simply a consequence. This is a topic in and of itself, but it's just important because we bring it up here. What does it mean, a consequence? Just like a person knows that if you don't brush your teeth, you're going to get cavities. Or if you do certain things wrong, if you don't take care of your body, if you eat unhealthy, you're going to become unhealthy. These are consequences of our actions. When we do the wrong things, there's basic consequences. The same thing is from our spiritual makeup. When we don't take care of ourselves spiritually and emotionally, there's consequences. They're not that God is trying to punish us. Judaism doesn't, God is not some type of vengeful God that is trying to make life difficult for us. No. He wants the best for us. And therefore, we have to remember that those consequences are there for our good. So do not despair of the punishment, means do not get worried about that punishment. Do not live in fear of the punishment. Because even if a person is going through struggles, it's there ultimately to help you. Now, taking that a step further, in Hasidic works, I don't want to get too involved in this, but in Hasidic works, they talk about what a person goes through afterlife, when a person passes away, and they have to go through what we call Gehenna. A lot of people will talk about burning fires of hell and things like that. And we've probably spoken about this in the past. But the way Hasidic texts talk about this, and also brought, as I said, in Kabbalah, is that it's a rehabilitation system. It's very painful, but not painful because you're getting burnt down and struck down because of you're a bad person and somebody wants to take revenge on you. No, it's simply a rehabilitation. It's like a person that, God forbid, has got addicted to some illegal substances, harmful substances, and you got to get them off that. The process of getting off that rehabilitation is an extremely painful process. And that's the painful process that we're told to go through. Okay? Now, I wanted to say that this is not an answer to any suffering that people, that real issues that some people go through. God forbid, something like the Holocaust, or the loss of a child, or anything that, or serious sicknesses. The Rebbe used to say, in all these types of cases, we would never ever justify and say, well, it's some type of cleansing process, or it's some type of consequence. God forbid. We have no idea why these things happen. Okay, that's not what I'm referring to at all when we call punishment. I was talking about the general idea of punishment, but when it comes to serious things that happen, we're never in Judaism ever allowed to try to justify why God does what he does. There is no reason. And as the Rebbe would say, when people would come to him, and that's the answer that we should all have, that we don't know, and God will have to answer that question when Mashiach comes. Why people suffered, and why people pass away, and why sometimes people have to lose children at a young age, and those type of things. These are things that we simply cannot even try, and we should not even try to explain. There is no explanation. Okay, but what we were talking about when we talk about punishment, in a sense, it's saying that we should recognize that when we do go through some difficult times, we shouldn't get despaired by it, but we should look at it as an opportunity for growth, and in order to help us rectify a particular situation. Okay, if you have that capacity to do it in and of yourself, and as I say, never to do it on behalf of somebody else, or to put that judgmental concept within somebody else. Okay, there's so much we can talk about this. Each line of Pirkei Avot opens a whole new can of worms, but those are the main points that I wanted to talk to you about. And now I will open so the shir is formally finished. So thank you to everyone for joining. If you want to go, you're welcome to. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. And I will afterwards get to Fritz's question, which is an interesting one.
I'm
Any
happy
questions?
to break the ice unless someone else wants to. There's
Go ahead.
so many hanging questions there. We saw at the start of the pandemic, right around the world, various Jewish communities attempt to do exactly what you described we shouldn't be doing, is to assign causation to the things that were going on, linking the consequences of COVID with various, sins being committed. But I think what you just described is that sort of response should not be encouraged.
100%. I could tell you what, there was one famous one that went around in a bunch of WhatsApp groups where there's quite a few Chabad people, and I can remember some of the Chabad, one guy was going on and was talking about how, you see, your Pesach's been cancelled, and now it teaches you that you shouldn't be going to Pesach hotels. And I could tell you that this was not coming from a Chabad source, and several Chabad rabbis on that chat, they were all like, get rid of this stuff. This is not our place to play God. So 100%, I think that's not called for. I think that's the clear understanding. I don't think it's us to start saying that this is we're never allowed to point to a saying that this is what you've done wrong, this is your sin because you're bad. 100%.
So is that philosophy and approach, is that unique to Chabad, or is that
I don't think it's unique to Chabad, and as I say, I think it's Jewish. I don't think it's a Chabad approach. I actually do not think it's a Chabad approach. I think it's a Jewish approach. Okay, and I just think that sometimes some people forget that, I think that possibly Chabad are more aware of it being a Jewish approach because the Rebbe was so strong about it. When bad things happened and there would be some non-Chabad people, I don't like saying non-Chabad, but some people would say something, I shouldn't say that, when people would try to justify the Holocaust, the most outspoken voice against that was the Rebbe. So we were so strongly trained that that's not Judaism. That's why I would say that. I don't know if everybody else has that. And the Rebbe would bring proof after proof after proof, showing that this is not a unique to Chabad. This is Judaism. We do never justify anything wrong. I could give you example after example. The Holocaust, with certain rabbis came out saying that it was because of the sins of the Jews, and the Rebbe fought tooth and nail against that. By the way, the Rambam did the same thing. There was a particular, we go into the Rambam who is accepted by all Jewry, when there were certain Jews that had converted to Islam and certain rabbis went out against those Jews, saying how wrong and sinful they were. The Rambam was the one, how dare you try to cause and say that it was sins or the punishments that they're getting are a result of innocence. And the Rambam, as I say, is accepted by all of mainstream Jewry. So this is definitely not unique to Chabad. It just be that the Rebbe was maybe the most outspoken voice against that approach.
So can I throw a little wrinkle in there? Lag BaOmer and the plague that Rabbi Kiva students had. So what does, what's taught often about Lag BaOmer and the plague, the causation of it, and then the plague stopped?
Okay, so two things about that. Interesting question, because over there
and we can expand for everyone else listening if they're not sure what I'm referring to.
Okay, so in the course of between Pesach and Shavuos, we have it's a miniature mourning period. We try not to listen to live music. So we don't have weddings, and we don't have haircuts, right? And that's because there was 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that all died within a short time. But that was different because, first of all, the Talmud itself tells us what was the cause of their downfall, and it was something which was totally miraculous. It was out of the blue. A plague goes and wipes out in a very short period of time 24,000 Jews. That was just totally random and specified, and therefore they understood that there was a very clear reason to it. And the reason given is that they never had respect one for the other. Now, that was it wasn't pointing fingers, it was just an understanding. I could tell you that the Rebbe had a very deep understanding to what was going on over there, but as I said, there was a unique circumstances, and that wasn't coming, that was we would say that was a divinely inspired understanding of what was wrong. And we have numerous times when you have certain plagues, when we have this time for what's the right thing, that we do a look into our own personalities and try to see what's going on. There is that concept, but we're never allowed to point fingers at other people and say, you're at fault, you're at fault, you're at fault, and this is why bad things are happening to you. That's a different thing. But when we are told, the Talmud does tell us that when bad things do happen to ourselves, we should do a research into yourself, a self-analyzation in where you can improve. And perhaps there's something and that is what it's there for. It's also there to help us improve. Mm-hmm. So there is that truth, but it's not a blanket idea that we can always go and point fingers. It's a very unique type of time.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to just touch quickly, unless there's any other also other direct connection questions on what we've discussed. Once again, show is over, so don't feel obligated to stay.
David, do you have a question?
I can't hear you, Sam. Are you trying to say something? You guys are muted. David, you're muted.
Sorry, just going to say goodbye.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. But look, just a little bit more on that question. If you try to improve yourself, means you acknowledge you are the and you start thinking it's possibly happened because you done something wrong.
Okay, so as I say, there is space for self-analyzation, self-introspection. There is space for that, but it's very unique. And I would say that we can do it to ourselves, and we could do it together with a mentor for something personal. If something's happened to you and you feel that you could have been responsible for it, and you can go to a mentor, a spiritual mentor, and say, somebody that you trust, that say, is there truth to what I'm thinking? Or where is their path? There were times that people went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, here is a path of how you can help yourself and how you can get over that. But it shouldn't be done just blankly. I think it has to be done with the guidance of a mentor, and once again, only for self-introspection, but never to justify the suffering of others. That's the importance of it. And every time, there's never a limit to how much we can do self-introspection of how we can improve ourselves. And that's what Hashem is sometimes. Talmud clearly says, sometimes God is sending you a message that you should work on yourself and improve yourself, 100%. But as I say, I think, sometimes you would find a mentor that you can discuss that with, that could probably help you. Okay. Does it answer the question, Sam?
In part, but it's a long conversation, so I think I other people to talk.
Okay. I'm gonna quickly touch on Fritz's point, which is, I suppose, connected to the fact that I announced that we go to the burial site of where the Rebbe passed the oil when we want to request that a blessing for our new marriage. Now, I want to tell you that this concept, we do not talk to the dead, is that we don't talk to the dead. It's true, that's the law. You're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to pray to the dead. You're not allowed to try to bring the dead back, in a sense that people have the power to communicate with the dead. We're not allowed to do that in all those type of witchcraft and magical ways. However, we know clearly from the Torah that we are supposed to go and pray at the grave sites of the righteous. This happens when you know the story of the spies, Alef, when he doesn't want to, exactly what we're talking about in today's Mishna, when Alef, right, he was the tribe, he was the leader of the tribe of Yehuda, and he doesn't want to be influenced by the other spies that he saw that they were going in the wrong direction. What does he go to do? He goes to pray at the gravesite of Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, right? And he goes and do it. It's written clearly in the Torah. And what happens? He comes out and he saves himself from the negative influence of these people. That's a perfect example of exactly what we're discussing, how we brought these things to discussions together. And this is something that has been throughout our history, that we always recognized that we don't pray to the dead, but we go and first of all, there's two things that we're doing when we go to the burial site of a person, of a righteous person that has passed on. Number one, it's brought down in halakha that we should do it. We should do it for our own deceased. If we have a person that has a relative on the yard site, we go. If we can, we try to visit the burial site of that person that's passed away, and you can visit it. Other times we don't overly do it, but we're allowed to do it. There's nothing wrong with visiting your loved ones that have passed on. But when he talks about righteous people, the halacha itself says we should be visiting them, especially on special times like Erev Rosh Hashanah and things like that. But what are you doing when you go? You're doing two things. We recognize that the burial site of a holy person is a holy place, and therefore it's a special place to pray. Because that person lived a life that was connected to Hashem, that feeling of connection is more felt over there. That's number one. It's just like going to the kotel, where there's a holiness over there. Number two is that when we go to the burial site, we recognize that that person lives on. And especially because that person was righteous, that person lives on now more than they lived when they were physically alive. And therefore we go and we request that that person pray to God on our behalf. There's a concept in Torah that says, Tzadikim goes v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, which means that the righteous decree and God listens. God gives a certain type of power that the righteous have the power to request things on our behalf, and they, so to speak, have these bygones on some of the regular pathways of how things work. It's a much bigger discussion than this, but I just want to answer the basic discussion of how this is deeply sourced within Torah, and it's something that Hasidic groups have been attacked on historically. I know that wasn't your perspective. It's coming from a desire to understand, which is really appreciated and very good. But it's something that is very deeply rooted in Torah and Jewish history. You could find it throughout the generations.
Rabbi, there's an obvious nuance in all of that which needs to be addressed, because we were just talking about how don't pray to the dead. Now there's an except if we're talking about Hasidic tzaddik, in which case it's okay.
No. It's never okay to pray to the dead. It's never okay to pray to the dead, even if it's a Hasidic tzaddik. When you go to the burial place of a righteous tzaddik, it's not a Hasidic tzaddik, by the way. We do the same thing. All Jews go to the burial site of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We all do that. It's nothing to do with Hasidic. You're not, God forbid, to pray to the tzaddik. That is idolatry. It doesn't make a difference how righteous it is. By the way, according to some commentaries, that's why some people believed that Moshe was his burials. We don't know where Moshe was buried, because they thought that by such a great tzaddik, we wouldn't be able to avoid people davening to him, and nations of the world would come and serve him, even though Jews wouldn't necessarily do that. But we're never allowed to pray to a tzaddik. And the nuance is that we don't pray to the tzaddik, we pray by that place, but we always are praying to Hashem. You don't say, tzaddik, please give me food. You say, please daven to Hashem. Yes, Mark, you've been waiting for your question. Go ahead.
Yes, so as far as I understand it, you don't do anything near a gravesite like putting on tefillin. You don't even walk around with your tzitzit hanging out. Why? Because they are no longer able to perform those mitzvahs and to do those things that we do, okay? So how can we be asking them to go and pray, which surely is a mitzvah to go and pray?
Okay, so let's just, it's a brilliant question, but I'll be totally honest that I'm really giving you a watered down question because of the greatness of that question. And by the way, all these questions, but it's a really, to understand this, we really have to get into understanding how souls are and what souls are after they pass away. We don't put on tefillin or keep our tzitzis out is because they're jealous that they can no longer do that. They can no longer do physical mitzvot with physical things. In other words, any mitzvah that requires physicality, they can no longer do. But if there's a mitzvah like something like prayer and Torah study, those are the two things that they pray. They don't necessarily pray, but they do the concepts of praise, which is praise to Hashem. They're definitely doing that, and they're studying Torah. It's almost like if you had exactly you, a soul after they pass away. It's a discussion that we should have one day, and I have given this the class on what is a soul without a body. It's you, but without your materialistic needs, and therefore you don't have so they definitely have the ability to go and pray on our behalf. And this is written within all the sources, as I say, way before Hasidism.
Can I ask you, Rabbi?
Yeah.
We don't wear tzitzit at a gravesite or later tefillin, but if it isn't tzaddik, he wouldn't know jealousy.
It's not about jealousy. Okay, the wording perhaps is correct. It's just that it's not nice. A tzaddik, a person that passes away, realizes the special, unique gift that we have, that we're able to connect to Hashem in a very special way when we put on tefillin. That's an ability that you only have while you're in this world. One of the things we're going to learn when we go through Pirkei Avot is it says that it's greater to be one moment in this world than all of the world to come. Why? Because the ability that you connect to Hashem through doing a mitzvah in this world is so immense, even greater than all the beautiful pleasure that you have in that world. And therefore, it's not that it's just not nice. It's like going and waving something in their face. When somebody's fasting and they haven't eaten for days, and you go and you go wave a delicious meal of whatever it is, a pizza or whatever it is that you love. It's just not a nice thing to do. It's disrespectful, right? It's not that they're necessarily jealous. They've done plenty of it and much more than us in their lifetimes, but they still can't do it. And they are envious of that ability to connect to Hashem in that special way. We don't appreciate it. They do. Okay.
Rabbi, it's a quick question.
The last question, because I actually have another meeting at 1:30,
right.
but I'm loving the questions.
Sam, I think, has just left the group, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Sam's son that we're commemorating, is that right?
Yes.
So would it have been appropriate to wish Sam a long life on the anniversary?
Yes.
Just want to check what the custom is there.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I said at the beginning of this year. That
Good.
we do wish him long life. We say l'chaim. L'chaim is to life. And we bless that the soul in its place, every yahrzeit, it has an elevation. That elevation that the soul goes through on the yahrzeit, it's a very special day for that soul. Every year on that yahrzeit, the soul has it's always elevating, but when we talk about it's an experiential elevation.
So talking about souls is a very appropriate
100%,
topic for
100%.
today. Beautiful.
100%.
Thank you.
So, I suppose the fact that it was divine providence that literally minutes before we got into this conversation that was going to be dedicated to Mark Briskin, my sister came from the burial side of the Rebbe and led us into this whole conversation with Fritz's question. So nothing happens by chance.
Shkoyach.
Nothing is coincidence.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Why do we need to go to a gravesite to pray? Because it's not physical praying, it's spiritual. Can't you do it from anywhere on earth?
You are correct. You don't have to. But we do know that historically, God has made this concept of holy places, like the Kotel, like a shul, and especially a place where a holy person now rests. That site becomes a holy place. Okay? And when you pray in that holy place, there's a certain elevation to your prayers. Now, does it mean that it has a different impact on you or on the prayer? And I think it's both. But one thing's for certain, if you go and you know you're standing right now in the place where a really holy person, once this is where that person is buried, it definitely should have a positive impact on your prayer. I can tell you it certainly does when you put that into perspective. And I think it also has a positive impact on how your prayers are influenced, are affected on a high. So when you get your right inspiration, it will also inspire your own prayers. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining. And we'll see you next week.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
Rabbi.
next week, same time, same place.
Thank you.
Or maybe we'll do it in person, who knows? Okay. Okay, bye. That's the greatest joke, right?
Very good. Thank you.
All right, see you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.